Hey, church, welcome to another session of Connecting the Dots, where we are taking passages from the Old Testament and from the New Testament, seeing how they're connecting together to understand the overall big story of the Bible. And last week we started looking at the nation of Israel, specifically that Israel is a major sign of the end of the age. And, some people don't see it that way. Some people think that Israel, when they rejected their Messiah, Jesus, and had him crucified, that Jesus rejected them, and that the church now has replaced Israel. And so God's special promises to that nation are no longer in effect. But all of those promises have now gone over to the church. And the church has replaced Israel. That's replacement theology. Now, I don't hold to that. I think God has a special plan and purpose for the nation of Israel, and he has a special plan for the church. If you read Romans chapter 11, which we won't do in this study, but if you read Romans chapter 11, it makes it pretty clear that God is not done with the nation. Well, I want to share with you that God still has a plan for Israel. We're going to see that in our study tonight. We're going to use a different passage of Scripture. There is a prophecy that was given in the Old Testament that talked about Israel's destiny, and the dots are connected to that prophecy in the New Testament. And its total fulfillment is not going to be realized until the end of the age. So it's an incredible linking together, connecting of the dots, because we see an Old Testament prophecy, a New Testament explanation of that, and then we see a modern day fulfillment of it. So it's kind of bridging the gap from way back in the early days of the Old Testament right to our day today. And so I want to do that by, first of all, introducing you to this prophecy, and do that by looking at an incident from the life of Jesus. I want to talk for a moment about Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday was that day when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, and all of the people were celebrating him. Hosanna to him who comes in the name of the Lord, waving palm branches, laying down their coats. It was a big day of celebration, and yet the Bible tells us that Jesus openly wept when he crested the hill of the Mount of Olives and saw the city of Jerusalem before him, that he wept out loud. And then he made a statement, and it's a strange, strange statement. It's odd as you read it. It's like, what in the world is he talking about? And it connects to the Old Testament prophecy that we're going to look at. So I want to start by looking at this incident on Palm Sunday in Luke chapter 19, verses 41 through 44. We read these words, "And when he approached, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, If you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. For the day shall come upon you when your enemies will throw up a bank before you and surround you and hem you in on every side and will level you to the ground and your children within you, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation." So Jesus expected these people to recognize what was going on, because he expected them to know the prophecy that we're going to look at in this session. The prophet Daniel, and that's where we're going to go, is the book of Daniel. The prophet Daniel had made it clear that the Jews of Jesus' day were living in the window of opportunity. And when we look at this passage tonight, we may think this passage is obscure. Probably most Christians in the church would have no clue about it. So why would Jesus expect these people to know it? And the reason is because they were well versed in the Hebrew Scriptures. This would have been a passage that they would have been familiar with. Daniel was in captivity in Babylon. The Israelite people had been deported from Israel to Babylon as part of God's judgment against the nation to awaken them to stir revival so that they could return to their land. And so Daniel is concerned about the Israeli people, and he's concerned about his homeland, Jerusalem, and the cities of Israel. And so he prayed about that, and God gave him a vision for the future of his people. In Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, Daniel records the statement that the Lord gave him. And so this is what it says: 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations it will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So Daniel is praying about the fate of his people Israel. And this is the answer that the Lord gave him. So this prophecy is about the nation of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. And Jesus had an expectation when he was coming into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. He had an expectation that they would be aware of that prophecy and that it was pointing toward their visitation by the Messiah. And he was fulfilling that prophecy, but they didn't get it. So the scope of God's plan for Israel spanned from the time of Daniel literally until the end of the age. Look back at verse 24 again. It says, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. Now notice that this is a Jewish issue because he talks about your people and he talks about your holy city. So this is about Israel. And Daniel was told that the time established for God to unfold his plan for them was 70 weeks. Now that's not a literal 70 weeks, which would be a couple of years. It's not a literal 70 weeks, because from the time that the Jewish people were allowed to rebuild their city after the returning from captivity until the project was completed actually ended up being many decades. It wasn't, a year and some weeks. We need to be clear about what God meant by the term weeks. It's actually the Hebrew word shabuim. So he said 70 shabuim have been determined or decreed for your people in your holy city. The word shabuim is literally translated weeks. Is literally translated sevens. So a literal translation would read 70 sevens have been decreed for you and your city. So this prophecy is going to span over a span of 70 units of 7. And the question would be, well, what's 7? And it's all determined by the context. So sevens could mean hours. So in other words, this prophecy could be 70 hours. Or sevens could mean days, or it could mean months, or weeks, or years, or decades, or centuries. You have to determine the period of 7 by the context of the passage. So are we talking about 7 days, 7 months, 7 weeks, 7 years, 7 decades, 7 centuries? We got to look at the context. So we find the context in Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 through 2. So if we look at Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, we read, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. See, Daniel was thinking about years, 70 years, and He knew this because of Jeremiah's prophecy. In Jeremiah 25:8, it says, "Therefore thus says the Lord of hosts, because you have not obeyed my words, behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, declares the Lord, and I will send to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land, and against its inhabitants, and against all these nations round about, and I will utterly destroy them, and make them a horror, and a hissing, and an everlasting desolation. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of joy, and the voice of gladness, and the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones, and the light of the lamp. And this whole land shall be a desolation and a horror, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So Daniel was reading the book of Jeremiah and saw that they would serve for 70 years. He's aware that 70 years is coming to a close, so he's praying about that. What's going to happen? We've been almost 70 years now. So he's thinking in terms of years when he's praying. So this prophecy, when God says, all right, here's what I'm doing, there's going to be 77s or 70 Shibuim, the prophecy is about 70 units of 7 years. Each Shibuim is a 7-year period. So the week is a total, 1 week is a total of 7 years. But there's 70 weeks of 7 years in this prophecy, which means that the actual length of time for this prophecy is 490 years. Let me put a chart up to show you what I mean. We've got 70 weeks, and there's 7 years for each week, so it's 70 times 7, and that makes a total of 490 years. That's the span of this prophecy. So Daniel's wondering, what's going to happen to my people? What's going to happen to my city? He's thinking in terms of years because he knows they're going to be in captivity for 70 years. And God says, I've got the answer for you. I'm going to lay it out for you. And it's going to span 70 Shibuim, or 70 periods of 7 years each, or 490 years. That's the length of time. Daniel was told that there were 6 specific things that God was going to do during this period of time. If you look at verse 24, he lays it right out. Look at what it says, and I put it in a numbered sequence so you can see all of these. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. And here's what's going to be accomplished in that period of time. 1, to finish the transgression. 2, to make an end of sin. 3, to make atonement for iniquity. 4, to bring an everlasting righteousness. 5, to seal up vision and prophecy. And 6, to anoint the most holy place. So this verse 24 really forms an overview. It gives the entire scope of what God is going to do. And then Daniel breaks the prophecy down into 3 sections. So verse 24 is the overview. Here's what's going to happen in these 70 weeks, or these 490 years. And then he breaks it into sections. In verse 25 of Daniel 9, it says, so you are to know and to discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, so in other words, once it's been decreed that the city is going to be rebuilt, then from that time until Messiah the Prince, until the Messiah comes, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So that's the first division, 7 weeks and 62, putting those two together, all right? And it will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Verse 26, then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. That's the third division. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes it desolate. So if you look at this chart that I have here, I've got the 3 sections divided up, and you'll notice the first section is 7 weeks, the second section is 62 weeks, the third section is 1 week, so that's a total of 70 weeks. And remember, each week is 7 years, so we can multiply the prophecy by years. So the first section is 70 weeks. 7 times 7 is 49, which means that the first section is 49 years. The second section is 62 weeks. So 7 times 62 is 434. That's the second division. The third section is 1 week, and 7 times 1 is 7. All right, so the total time is 7 times 70, which is 490 years. Or let's look at it one more way. The first section is a period of 49 years. The second section is a period of 434 years. And the third section is a period of 7 years, which is a total of 490 years. So God is saying, this is my big plan for the Jewish people and for their city. And it's going to be divided up into these three parts. And in this first part, there's going to be this decree to rebuild the city, right? And then at the end of the second section, the Messiah is going to be cut off. And then in this third section, which is the 70th week, or a period of 7 years, this one is going to rise up, who's going to go into the temple and desecrate it in the middle of that week, or in about the 3.5-year period. So that's how it's all divided up. Now let's look more closely at that prophecy. If you look at verse 25, Daniel said, "So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem." So the first thing we need to notice is that God is telling Daniel that there's going to be a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. He tells Daniel that the streets are going to be rebuilt, the walls are going to be rebuilt, the building project is going to happen during difficult times. Now there's two things that we need to be aware of here. First of all, we know exactly when this decree was given. We know it both from the Bible, and we also know it from history. And then also the date of that decree is the exact moment that Daniel's prophetic time clock began to count off. Now Nehemiah chapter 2 records the decree of Artaxerxes when he told them they could go back and rebuild their city. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "And it came about in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it to the king." This is Nehemiah speaking. "Now I had not been sad in his presence, so the king said to me, 'Why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart.' Then I was very much afraid." And he was afraid because cupbearers were not allowed to be sad in the presence of the king, because it made them suspicious that maybe he was slipping the king poison or something. So in verse 3 he says, "I said to the king, 'Let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city and the place of my father's tombs lies desolate, and its gates have been consumed by fire?' Then the king said to me, 'What would you request?' So I prayed to the God of heaven. I said to the king, 'If it please the king, and if your servant has found favor before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it.' Then the king said to me," the queen sitting beside him, "How long will your journey be, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. And I said to the king, "If it please the king, let letters be given me for the governors in the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress which is by the temple, for the wall of the city, and for the house to which I will go." And the king granted them to me, because the good hand of my God was on me. Now the decree was given on March 5th, 445 BC. We know that from history. So Daniel tells us that from that date, 445 BC, 483 years would count off until the Messiah came. And he divided that 483 years into two sections. He divided it into 49 years, which was 7 weeks, and then 434 years, which he calls 62 weeks. Which means there's still 7 years or 1 week left, but we'll deal with that next time. So we're just going to deal with these first 69 weeks. Now there's a lot of reasons that Daniel separated the first two sections from the third, which we're going to look at another time. But I first want to look at the division of these first two sections. One reason that we have this division of sections is because from the time that King Artaxerxes made his decree until the city was completed, it was 49 years. So Daniel predicted that exactly. I mean, that's just how long it took. And then from the time that the city was completed until the Messiah came, there would be another 483 years. So that means that there was a specific count of years from the completion of the city until the Messiah came. And right there we see that the Jews should have gotten it. I mean, it was plainly stated that when the city is done, there's this amount of years and the Messiah will come. I mean, they should have been looking for their Messiah to arrive in that time window. But it's even more specific than that. So Daniel 9:26 says, "Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing." So this is saying that at the end of the 483 years, 62 weeks is 483 years, so at the end of the 483 years, the Messiah will be cut off. And the word cut off means executed for a criminal offense. So this clearly tells us that their Messiah will be killed as a criminal, and they were told that as well. And then on top of that, the phrase "and have nothing" actually means not for himself. So the Messiah would be executed for a criminal offense. It wouldn't be for himself. He would be innocent, even though he died a criminal's death. And then after the Messiah is executed, the city and the sanctuary will be destroyed. So verse 26 says, "Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come," so this prince is going to come, so the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. So this is saying that a prince is going to come, and in the next verse, he's going to desecrate the temple. But the people of that prince, which is the Romans, so that's why it's believed that the Antichrist is going to come out of a newly formed Roman government, or a government that's of that region, a coalition of nations, probably something to do with the United Nations perhaps, or the European Union. But anyways, the people are going to destroy the city. So that's predicting the Romans destroying the city. Now, what's interesting about this prophecy is that when Daniel received it, the city was already destroyed by the Babylonians. All right, and he's predicting that it's going to be destroyed, but it already is destroyed. So that means that the city is going to be rebuilt, and then it's going to be destroyed again, and it's going to be destroyed by the Romans. So this prophecy tells us that there's a very narrow window of time to find a candidate for the Messiah, because we read here that the Messiah will be executed for a criminal offense between two specific dates. So the temple was decreed to be built in March of 445 BC. And so if you count off from that date 483 years, whatever that date is, your window of time for the Messiah to come and to die as a criminal is between that date and the date that the temple and the city was destroyed in 70 AD. So we have a very narrow window of time for the Messiah to come. It's a window of just 40 years, but it's even more specific than that. So we go by a solar calendar, which is a 365-day year. But the Jews went by a lunar calendar, which has only 360 days in their year. And then every so many years, the Jews added a 13th month to adjust for the calendar, kind of similar to the way that we add a leap year. Sir Robert Anderson, a Knight of the British Crown and a mathematician and a Christian, took into account this 360-day Jewish year. He added the 13th month that was added for the lunar cycles at the times that Israel did that, and he adjusted for the year 0, and then he wrote his findings in a book titled The Coming Prince. He found that 483 Jewish years added up to 173,880 days. So from March 5, 445 BC to 173,880 days later, making all the adjustments with the extra month added in and so on, takes you to March 31st, 30 AD. So whoever the Messiah is, he had to come. He had to die innocently as a criminal between the years of 30 and 70 AD. So you've got this narrow window of 40 years. Between 30 and 70 AD, somebody had to come. They had to present themselves as the Messiah. They had to be executed as a criminal, but they had to be innocent when they were executed. All right, so it's within that window of time, and Jesus expected these people to understand that prophecy. He wept over the city because he knew that they were missing it. Well, I only know of one candidate who fits that description, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ, who came in that window of time, proclaimed himself to be the Messiah, was killed as a criminal on a cross, and yet was declared innocent by all those who were around. Pilate declared him innocent. Herod declared him innocent. The centurion declared him innocent. Judas declared him innocent. Pilate's wife declared him innocent. All of those did, and even God the Father did, because God raised him from the dead 3 days later. And so Jesus is the only candidate in that period of time that fits that. It has to be from either from sometime from 30 AD, which is the 183,000, or whatever those dates are, 183,770 days, and it has to be before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That takes up the first 69 weeks of Daniel's prophecy. Now, there's one more week or 7-year period to look at. And that 7-year period is going to span all the way into our time. And that's going to help us connect the dots from the Old Testament to the New Testament to our day. And so I hope you'll join us next week as we dive into Daniel's 70th week to help us connect the dots.